The construction of an entire mansion purpose-built for mass murder is something straight out of a horror classic, such as Dracula or Frankenstein. But for the unsuspecting residents of 1890s Chicago, it was far from fiction. Instead, it was a grueling possibility that a hotel visit would end in systematic torture and execution at the hands of one of the most notorious individuals, known as America's first and arguably worst serial killer. This is a story of H.H. Holmes. H.H. Holmes, born Herman Webster Mudgett on May 16, 1861, was the third child of Levi Horton Mudgett and Theodate Page Price. He grew up in a Christian household as one of 5 siblings, with 2 older and 2 younger siblings. His father was known to be strict, often enforcing discipline rigorously. While Holmes was a bright and intelligent child, his childhood was far from easy, as he frequently faced bullying at school. Holmes' struggles included a medical condition that gave him limited control over his eye muscles, resulting in an awkward demeanor and difficulty maintaining eye contact. This condition made him an easy target for ridicule among his peers. Adding to this, Holmes had a deep-seated fear of the local doctor's office, which the local children exploited. They forced him to enter the doctor's office and touch a human skeleton. Surprisingly, this experience sparked a fascination within Holmes. His fear turned into curiosity, and he began to develop an interest in medicine. While some accounts suggest he practiced surgeries on animals during his youth, this remains unverified. Holmes' intelligence shone through in his academic endeavors. He attended Phillips Exeter Academy before graduating from Gilmanton Academy with honors at the young age of 16. Soon after finishing school, on July 8, 1878, Herman married Clara Lovering. 2 years into their marriage, the couple welcomed a son, Robert. Despite becoming a father, Herman had minimal involvement in his son's life, as his focus appeared to shift elsewhere. After finishing high school, Herman went on to study medicine at a small college in Vermont. However, in September 1882, he transferred to the prestigious Department of Medicine and Surgery at the University of Michigan. It was during this time in medical school that Herman became drawn to a darker path, running elaborate scams. One particularly disturbing scheme involving stealing donated bodies from the university's anatomy lab. Herman would brutally mutilate the bodies until they were completely unrecognizable. He then fabricated fake identities, took out insurance policies on these fictional individuals, and claimed they had died in accidental circumstances. By presenting the disfigured bodies as evidence, he successfully collected the insurance payouts. The insurers were unable to challenge the claims. Holmes graduated from medical school in 1884 and relocated to Chicago to begin his career in pharmacy. It was around this time that he adopted the alias H.H. Holmes, under which he would continue his pattern of deceit and illegal activities. Holmes' personal life was equally chaotic and deceitful. 7 years after the birth of his son with his first wife Clara, Holmes married Myrta Belknap in 1886. Without having legally divorced Clara. 3 years later, on July 7, 1889, Myrta gave birth to the granddaughter Lucy in Englewood, Illinois. Lucy, taking the Holmes surname, lived with her mother and father in Chicago. Despite filing for divorce from Clara, Holmes never finalized the proceedings, leaving his first marriage legally intact. Holmes' inability or unwillingness to remain committed didn't stop there. He married Minnie Williams in 1893 and then Georgina Yoke in 1894, making him a husband to 4 women at the same time. He had never finalized a single divorce. All the while, he maintained numerous other relationships, clearly demonstrating that fidelity and commitment were not among his priorities. Upon moving to Chicago, Holmes lived with his second wife, Myrta, and took up a position as a pharmacist at a local drugstore. The store was owned by Dr. Elizabeth Holton, with whom Holmes developed a close relationship, as well as with her unwell husband. Sadly, Elizabeth's husband succumbed to cancer, leaving her to manage the pharmacy alone. Holmes saw an opportunity and manipulated Elizabeth into selling the store to him. After the purchase, he allowed her to remain living in the upstairs apartment as she had no other options. However, not long after, Elizabeth mysteriously disappeared. Holmes claimed she had moved to California to live with relatives, but suspicions arose that Holmes may have murdered her to get her out of the way. To this day, these suspicions remain unproven. Now in full control of the drugstore, Holmes took his ambitions further by purchasing a lot across the street. Speculation surrounded what the lot might become, but no one could have imagined the horrifying plans Holmes had in store. What he constructed later became infamously known as the Murder Castle. The building was a 3-story structure that occupied the entire block. Though it looked like a hotel, it was never officially advertised as such. Holmes attracted guests through newspaper ads, offering rooms for rent, luring victims into his meticulously designed trap. The ground floor was open to the public and housed the relocated drugstore alongside other businesses, lending the entire building an air of legitimacy and reducing suspicion. To maintain control, Holmes installed alarms to alert him if anyone attempted to access areas beyond the first floor. So, what was he trying to hide? The 3rd floor of the castle contained furnished rooms that appeared normal at first glance. However, other parts of the 3rd floor were far from ordinary. Narrow, twisting hallways led to unexpected dead ends and locked doors. The layout was deliberately confusing, with some rooms left unfinished, giving the impression that they were part of an ongoing construction project. The 2nd floor was a masterpiece of Holmes' devious planning. It contained 6 hallways and 51 doors leading to various rooms. Of these, 35 were standard bedrooms, while the others were far more sinister. Many were airtight, soundproof chambers, varying in size, from small, cramped spaces with low ceilings to large rooms. Some rooms were accessible only through hidden entrances, and secret passageways snaked through the floor, alongside closets and staircases leading nowhere. Everything about the floor was designed to confuse and disorient anyone unlucky enough to find themselves there. Most chillingly, many of these rooms were equipped with concealed gas pipes, controlled by a panel in Holmes' private quarters. This allowed him to pump toxic gases into the rooms, effectively transforming them into gas chambers. The disorienting layout and hidden features left victims panicked and easier for Holmes to manipulate. Further adding to the horror were the numerous shafts scattered throughout the 2nd floor, leading straight to the basement. These chutes, resembling those used for laundry or trash, were used to transport Holmes' victims. The basement served as Holmes' personal dungeon, where he committed his most heinous acts. Accessible only through a trap door in one of the upstairs bathrooms, it was filled with eerie contraptions and torture devices of Holmes' own design. Among these were acid vats, a dissection table, and a crematorium. He also concocted devices such as medieval-inspired torture rack he referred to as the elasticity determinator, which, according to Holmes, could allegedly stretch a person to twice their natural height. Holmes would drug his victims, transport them to the basement, and subject them to horrific torture before ultimately killing them. The Murder Castle was a grotesque blend of cold calculation and monstrous imagination, a place unlike anything anyone had encountered before. While living in his Murder Castle in Chicago, Holmes ran one of his most shocking scams yet. He turned human bodies into skeleton sets that he would then sell. He completely skinned and dissected the bodies before cleaning and polishing the bones. These were sold to doctors and schools for research and learning purposes. His price was significantly lower than any other seller. This raised suspicions among those who were buying them, but they chose to turn a blind eye to it for such a great deal. During the 1893 World's Fair, held in Chicago to commemorate the anniversary of Columbus's voyages, millions flocked to the city to join the celebration. Holmes seized this opportunity, advertising his castle as affordable lodging for out-of-town visitors. Due to it being the 1800s, people would arrive before looking for a place to stay. The absence of phones in the era meant no one could verify the whereabouts of their loved ones after checking in. a convenience Holmes exploited. After checking into the castle, the guests would quickly become disorientated and unsuspectingly trapped, becoming victims of Holmes' atrocious acts. Holmes applied similar ruthlessness to some of his female employees. He required many to take out life insurance policies, naming him the sole beneficiary. While Holmes covered the premiums, the sinister arrangement assured he reaped a payout upon their untimely deaths. Several women were reportedly murdered under these grim conditions. It is speculated that during his killing spree, H.H. Holmes may have claimed the lives of over 200 victims. While there is considerable uncertainty surrounding many of his alleged crimes, 5 victims have been assumed. The first is Julia Connor and her daughter Pearl. Julia met H.H. Holmes in 1892 while he was still legally married to his second wife, though they were no longer living together. Julia's husband had been working for Holmes, who had offered the family a place to stay. Over time, Julia and Holmes began an affair, which eventually led to Julia's husband discovering the relationship. He left, abandoning Julia and her daughter Pearl to remain with Holmes. Julia and Holmes continued their affair, and Julia eventually became pregnant. According to Holmes, in September 1892, he offered to perform an abortion on Julia. However, she did not survive the procedure, a tragic outcome, not entirely unexpected during an era when such operations carry significant risks. Still, many believe this was not a tragic accident, but an intentional murder committed by Holmes. Holmes later admitted to poisoning Julia's 12-year-old daughter, Pearl, as during the excavation of Holmes' infamous cellar, a partial skeleton matching the size and age of a young child, possibly Pearl, was discovered. The next known victim of H.H. Holmes was 23-year-old Emmeline Sigrand. Emmeline began working for Holmes in May 1892. Engaged to another man in a different city, she initially appeared devoted to her fiancé. However, in true Holmes fashion, he exploited his manipulative charm and soon initiated an affair with her. According to Holmes, in 1892, when Emmeline was preparing to leave to marry her fiancé, she stopped by his office to speak with him. She allegedly told Holmes that if he agreed to marry her and relocate to another city, she would write to her fiancé, calling off their engagement and confessing that she couldn't be happy with him. However, Holmes later gave a chillingly different account of these events. He claimed to have trapped her in one of the vaults within his infamous murder castle, forcing her to write a letter to her fiancé. Holmes later described a horrifying end for her, stating that she suffered a slow and lingering death. To further cover up his heinous crime, Holmes forged additional letters to Emmeline's family, weaving a false story that she had run off with another man, an untrustworthy character she regretted becoming involved with. At the time, her family had no means of disproving this narrative, leaving them distraught and without answers. Years later, investigators discovered what they believed to be evidence of her gruesome fate with Holmes' murder castle. It was Emmeline's hair and bones. The last 2 women were sisters, 24-year-old Minnie Williams and 18-year-old Anna Nanny Williams. Their father, a physician in Texas, left Minnie an inheritance of money and real estate upon his death. The girls were raised by family in Texas, but Minnie eventually moved to New York to pursue an acting career. While in New York, she crossed paths with H.H. Holmes, who introduced himself as Edward Hatch. At the time, nothing significant happened. However, by 1893, Minnie had reconnected with Holmes in Chicago, where the two married. While living with Holmes, Minnie wrote to her friends in Texas, inviting them to visit. Her young sister Anna accepted the invitation and moved to Chicago in June 1893 to live with Minnie. Holmes would later claim that Minnie, overcome with jealousy, murdered Anna and that he only helped her cover up the crime. However, he eventually confessed to killing both sisters. Holmes stated that he picked up Anna from the train station when she arrived in Chicago. He claimed to have robbed her of her money before forcing her into an airtight chamber, locking her inside to suffocate. Chillingly, he revealed that Anna had never even seen her sister upon her arrival in Chicago. Later that same day, Holmes said he chloroformed Minnie in her sleep and disposed of her body in the basement. Holmes also alleged that he murdered Minnie and Anna's brother after taking out a life insurance policy in Minnie's name. According to Holmes, he poisoned the brothers so Minnie could collect the payout, though his claim has never been proven. When police ultimately searched Holmes' infamous murder castle, they discovered Minnie's watch chain and Anna's garter buckle inside an oven. After the 1893 World's Fair concluded, H. Holmes abandoned his infamous murder castle and shifted his focus solely to running insurance scams. One of his new schemes involved stealing horses from Texas, shipping them to St. Louis and reselling them. This venture earned him a considerable sum of money, but also marked the beginning of his downfall, ultimately leading to his capture. Holmes was eventually arrested and sent to jail. There, he befriended his cellmate, Marion Hedgepeth, and devised a new con. Holmes planned to take out a $10,000 life insurance policy on himself and fake his own death. The idea was for Hedgepeth to collect the payout and send all but $500 to Holmes. For context, $10,000 in the late 1800s is equivalent to over $300,000 today. Once released on bail, Holmes attempted to carry out the plan, but the insurance company became suspicious and refused to pay. Undeterred, Holmes adjusted his strategy and concocted a similar scheme with 38-year-old Benjamin Pitezel. Holmes persuaded Pitezel to fake his own death with the understanding that Pitezel's wife would collect the insurance payout and split a portion of it with Holmes. However, Holmes had no intention of faking the death. Instead, he murdered Pitezel and collected the money for himself. Evidence later revealed that the chloroform had been administered to Pitezel after his death, potentially in an attempt to mislead the authorities about the cause of death. Despite his recent failed scam with his own life insurance, Holmes succeeded in collecting $7,000 of the $10,000 payout. Holmes allocated $1,500 of the money to a lawyer who assisted him with the scheme and gave $500 to Pitezel's widow, claiming her husband had fled to South America. He then manipulated her into allowing 3 of her 5 children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, to travel with him under the guise of helping her manage her challenging circumstances. Struggling with her situation, including the belief that her husband had deserted her, she reluctantly agreed. Holmes took the children across northern United States and into Canada, falsely assuring them and their mother that they were en route to meet Benjamin. To maintain the deception, Holmes even wrote letters to Mrs. Pitezel, detailing the locations he claimed to have visited with her children. Each time she attempted to reunite with them, he claimed they had already moved on to the next destination. Tragically, the grim truth eventually came to light. The decomposed bodies of Alice and Nellie Pitezel were discovered in Toronto. Additionally, police found teeth and fragments of bone belonging to Howard in a rented cottage in Indianapolis. Holmes' intricate web of deceit finally began to unravel in 1894. Furious about being cheated out of the $500 Holmes had promised him, Marion Hedgepeth, Holmes' former cellmate, informed the police about their planned insurance scam and the various crimes Holmes had confessed to during their time in prison together. This tip-off set the authorities on Holmes' trail, marking the beginning of the end for one of history's most notorious conmen and serial killers. On November 7, 1894, Holmes was arrested in Boston as he prepared to flee the country. Earlier that same year, he had married and, alongside his new wife, was planning an escape. However, his capture set off a chain of chilling investigations centered around his infamous murder castle. Police grew suspicious after learning that Holmes had forbidden anyone from accessing the top 2 floors of the building, not even for cleaning. When investigators began to search the property, they uncovered a nightmarish scene. The castle was filled with strange items, but it was in the basement that they made the most horrifying discovery yet: human remains. The basement was littered with dismembered and decomposed bodies, so damaged that it was impossible to determine their identities or even the exact number of victims. Beyond this gruesome finding, it was revealed that Holmes had sold many of the skeletons, making the total death toll even harder to estimate. The discoveries caught widespread attention, and soon other criminal investigations linked Holmes to further acts of cruelty. Authorities in Philadelphia and Toronto joined forces after uncovering the bodies of Alice and Nellie Peitzel, two missing children connected to Holmes. The chilling search for the missing children and the unraveling horrors of the murder castle captivated public interest. After these discoveries, investigators examined the life insurance policies Holmes had fraudulently collected after murdering Benjamin Peitzel, a former associate. These inquiries led to Holmes being convicted of Peitzel's murder. Shockingly, Holmes later confessed to 27 additional murders and 6 attempted murders. Yet, his confession appeared to be influenced by greed. He accepted $3,000 in today's money in exchange for his detailed account, raising questions about its accuracy. Was he confessing to crimes for monetary gain, or did his greed mask an even deeper disregard for human life? While Holmes admitted to 28 murders, it is widely believed that his victim count could be far higher, possibly up to 230 lives lost. This figure is based on reports of missing persons and the testimonies of former neighbors. Nonetheless, only 6 murders were conclusively linked to Holmes, including the confirmed killings of Julia Connor and her daughter Pearl, Emily Segrand, Minnie and Anna Williams, and Benjamin Peitzel. Holmes' reign of terror came to an end on May 7, 1896, 2 years after his arrest, when he was executed by hanging at the Philadelphia prison. Death did not come swiftly. His neck failed to snap immediately, leaving him to endure a slow and agonizing death. His body was not officially pronounced dead until 20 minutes after the hanging began. After Holmes' death, Marion Hedgepeth, who had informed the police about Holmes' wrongdoings, was granted a pardon for his own crimes. Tragically, Hedgepeth's life came to a violent end on December 31, 1910, when he was fatally shot by a police officer during a holdup at a Chicago saloon. Years later, on March 7, 1914, 2 decades after Holmes was executed, the former caretaker of the infamous murder castle took his own life. Family members revealed that he had been tormented by haunting visions and guilt for months leading up to his death. With his passing, many of the mysteries surrounding the murder castle were lost forever. H. Holmes has long been the subject of chilling theories, with some even suggesting he faked his death to escape justice. Holmes himself may have fueled these suspicions with an unusual request before his execution. He asked to be buried in concrete. He claimed this was to prevent anyone from exhuming his body and dissecting it, just as he had dissected his victims. The request was granted, but skeptics believe it was a calculated move to ensure his body could never be found, as it wouldn't be in the grave to begin with. Some theorists argue that Holmes bribed prison guards to substitute a cadaver for his own body during the hanging, providing an opportunity to flee to South America. Adding to the intrigue, in 1988, a janitor from Holmes' infamous murder castle claimed he had come across letters that provided evidence Holmes had duped his lawyer, priest, and prison officials into burying another man in his place. However, the janitor never produced these letters, leaving the claim to linger as an unverified rumor. Fast forward to 2016, Holmes' great-grandchildren petitioned the court to exhume his body and conduct DNA tests to finally put the conspiracy theories to rest. On March 9, 2016, the court granted the request. After 120 years, Holmes' grave, encased in cement as per his wishes, was opened. It took 3 days of effort to extract the coffin, which then had to be sawed open. But what the team found shocked everyone. The coffin was empty. Not willing to give up, the team continued digging and, 4 inches below, discovered a second coffin. After 12 painstaking hours, they finally revealed the remains of a body buried within, presumably those of H. Holmes. To confirm the identity, experts drilled into the skull to extract DNA and sent samples to a lab in the UK. They also matched dental records to verify the findings. The DNA results revealed a genetic link to Holmes' family, conclusively proving the body belonged to him. This discovery finally silenced the decades-old claims of an elaborate escape and confirmed that H. Holmes, in the end, did face the punishment he deserved.